It started as a joke. Or so everyone thought. They taught a chimp to drive a tank. Then gave him a cigar and a shiny new rank. That was the headline, splashed everywhere. From stuffy defense forums to seedy backwater bar hollows and every pirate satire stream in between. Most folks just laughed, rolled their eyes, and clicked away. But the next line in the story was harder to shake off. The human military had joined forces with the Bkari. For anyone even a little bit familiar with galactic affairs, that sounded absolutely insane. The Bkari weren't allies. Hell, they barely even counted as a civilization. If you listen to the more uptight species, four-armed, fanged, and built like they'd won evolution's cruelest lottery, the Bkari were apex predators on a world where everything was venomous or had bones for weapons. Diplomacy wasn't in their dictionary. You didn't sit down and have tea with the Bkari, you ran. Or you prayed you could shoot faster than they could pounce. And humans? Well, humans were dangerous in their own weird way. Not wolves, too social. Too messy, but raccoons with nukes. Sneaky. Clever. Unpredictable. Always rummaging through galactic trash for an edge. No one believed it at first. A Human-Bkari Alliance sounded like a bad joke cooked up by a neural net with a few too many drinks. But it wasn't a joke. It was real. Worse. It was working. Nobody saw that part coming. Least of all Lieutenant Colonel Granger. His official title was Liaison Officer, which basically translated to, the idiot who shares a barracks with monsters because no one else will. His first assignment dumped him on Hazik 5, a jungle moon you could practically smell through a holofeed. His whole life fit into a battered duffel bag and a 2-week supply of synth protein bars. His translator trip was still buggy from the jump, tossing random static into every other sentence. Granger's welcome wagon was a Bkari hunter named Serak. Now, picture this, 7 feet tall. Fur so thick it looked like matted carpet. And 2 tusks like blackened scythes jutting out from his jaw. Around his neck, a necklace made from the vertebrae of some poor sentient who probably died screaming. Serak lumbered up, gave Granger a long, noisy sniff, and then slapped him on the back so hard he almost folded in half. You do not smell like weakness. Serak growled through the translator's fuzz. Good. We will not eat you. Appreciate that. Granger managed, reeling, trying not to drop his bag or his dignity. It wasn't exactly a heartwarming start, but it could have been worse. Over the next few weeks, Granger learned a lot about Bkari culture, most of it the hard way. First lesson, the Bkari loved violence like humans loved caffeine. If something could be punched, chewed, or thrown, they were into it. Second, they respected brains over brute force. Outsmart a Bkari, and you'd earn more respect than if you could bench press a hover tank. Third lesson, they were hilariously, almost tragically, terrible at planning. All this came to a head during a joint military exercise in Sector X-90. Human and Bkari units, tossed into a simulated war with the Jiv, a reptilian hive-mind species that specialized in digging in and holding ground. The scenario? Survive, coordinate, and rout the enemy using teamwork. Command didn't expect much. Hell, most people expected carnage, arguments, and a mountain of paperwork. Granger gathered the squad, a mix of nervous human grunts and Bkari warriors already arguing over who'd get the most kills. Look, he said, rubbing his temple as Serak loomed nearby. If we just charge the Jiv head-on like last time, we'll end up with more holes than a meteor sieve. Serak grunted in agreement, tusks gleaming. But glorious deaths? Not glorious, just stupid. Granger shot back, shaking his head. So he pitched something wild. Let the Jiv think they'd won. Pull a fake retreat. Then circle around through the swamp tunnels for a surprise flank. It needed patience, stealth, and coordination, the 3 things Bkari had always failed at. To everyone's shock, they actually listened. 0400 local time. The simulation started. Instead of their usual battle cries and reckless charges, the Bkari got low, sinking into the muck and breathing slow and shallow. Through his infrared goggles, Granger watched as Serak signaled his pack, just a flick of 2 fingers. A snap of a stick. Suddenly, these towering monsters moved like ghosts, vanishing into the fog. When the Jiv broke ranks to chase the retreating humans, the Bkari exploded from the mist, wielding glowing viro axes and those terrifying 3-bladed glaives. It was fast, brutal, and, for the first time ever, coordinated. Granger's humans circled in from the other side, pinning the Jiv between 2 walls of muscle and metal. It was over before the simulation even finished tallying casualties. Later, in the command tent, General Suckle of the Jiv watched the playback, mandibles twitching in disbelief. "They should not work together," he hissed. "It violates logic." But they did. And it was working. Word spread like wildfire. Pirate bands started steering clear of any sector patrolled by the new Human-Bkari Legion. Criminal syndicates, like the Andal, were so frustrated with Granger's ambushes, usually involving nothing more than a handful of discarded crates, a barrel of fermented nutmush, and an ancient music player blasting human blues, that they put a bounty on his head. The galaxy was reeling. For so long, it had run on old rivalries, predictable hatreds. Now, suddenly, humans and Bkari weren't just working together, they were thriving. One bit of footage sealed their reputation. Zadrik Null, a ragtag human outpost under siege by Bkari automatons, killer bots. Basically, the defenders were outnumbered and outgunned, and things were going downhill fast. Then a Bkari drop pod crashed through the roof, and out stepped Serak's cousin, dragging a repurposed autocannon in one hand, hurling grenades with the other. His war cry echoed through every channel, "For my brothers in blood and dirt." That phrase, blood and dirt, became a slogan. The Human-Bkari front. Born in mud and fire. By the time Granger was called up to a high-level summit at Rakan's Rest, a floating citadel, supposedly neutral, where everyone wore expensive robes and pretended not to be terrified, the alliance was all anyone could talk about. The quarrel delegation called for an emergency stop to alliance-based aggression. The Char sent in auditors to comb through every joint mission report. But nobody could deny the results. Granger walked into the chamber, still in a plain uniform crusted with Bkari swamp mud, and found himself at the center of a storm of angry diplomats. He sat next to Serak, who now sported a crooked United Terran Command patch, half burned, barely stitched to his shoulder. The Polari ambassador nearly choked. "You gave that thing a rank?" The ambassador sputtered. "It's a beast." Serak blinked, then pulled a small projector from his satchel and tossed it on the table. A hologram flickered to life, showing a Bkari dragging a wounded human through gunfire, shielding him with his body, marking the ground with his own blood for extraction. "Beasts don't do that," Granger said quietly. "Brothers do." The insults flew. But Serak didn't blink. Bkari didn't care for protocol. He sat barefoot, claws drumming on the table, eyes never leaving the Polari ambassador, like he was deciding if this was dinner or just dessert. A task chancellor hissed from the far end, skin fluttering. "They say you've turned savages into soldiers. Or maybe, you've made your soldiers into savages." Granger folded his hands. "We didn't turn anyone into anything. We adapted." A Bkari rep, a spider with chrome-plated limbs, word mechanically. "Adaptation is one thing. Alliance with a species known to chew through prisoners' bones is another. Do you know what your prisoners did to us?" Serak's voice came out a low, dangerous rumble, almost too deep for the translator to handle. "They carved our names into their armor, hunted us for sport. Now, they do not." You could feel the room shift. For generations, the Bkari had been written off, too wild, too dangerous, too much trouble to conquer. Humans? Calculating, stubborn, but with boundaries. This alliance upended everything. A reel of combat footage rolled, unauthorized but impossible to ignore. Bkari warriors shielding human marksmen during reloads. Human sergeants carrying wounded Bkari scouts to safety. Joint training drills full of growling and insults. But every time, the line held. "You may not get it," Granger said at last. "But it works. Not because it looks good. Not because it's comfortable. But because we both want to win. And we're tired of losing the old way." Task's Chancellor sniffed. At what cost? That, as always, was the question no one wanted to answer. Granger glanced at Serak, who flashed a toothy grin, not a threat, but something close to pride. 3 weeks later, the galaxy learned what that cost would be. The Drax Syndicate made their move first. Nobody was surprised. The Drax had always been more warlord than government, a loose cartel of pirates, mercs, and ex-soldiers stitched together by greed and a taste for chaos. Rulka 7, a critical neutral trade hub, was the perfect target. If you wanted to send a message, you hit where the money moved. So when the Drax fleet arrived in orbit, raining hellfire on the landing pads and announcing the whole system was under lockdown, most traders just prayed and sent emergency pings out to the nearest authorities. But the Drax hadn't done their homework. They thought they were facing another ragtag militia, some desperate outpost. Maybe a handful of human marines and a couple of hairy monsters with clubs. What they got instead was Operation Ember Drop. Granger was there, boots on the ground. Not in charge but in the thick of it. Official command belonged to Commander Juno, the only person trusted by both human and Bkari brass, and an old friend of Granger's from the early "let's see if this works" days. The lead dropship came in hot, streaking through Atmo with enough G-force to flatten most sentients. Human shock troops dropped first, slam landing in armored grab pods that punched straight through the thickest smog. Then came the Bkari. Their pods weren't sleek or subtle. They didn't need to be. They were open-frame metal coffins, hurtling out of orbit and into the Drax bunkers like thrown boulders. They weren't aiming for the outskirts. They wanted the heart of the Syndicate's defenses. Fire, thunder, chaos. And then, out of the wreckage, Bkari brutes charging, axes spinning, war cries rising over the alarms. Granger's pod hit concrete seconds before Serak's. The resulting crash sent a shockwave down the block. Serak erupted from the twisted hull, hurling aside a Drax gunner with one arm while spinning a glaive with the other. Granger, ever the pragmatist, kept his head down and his team moving, 12 grizzled veterans who didn't flinch at the sight of Bkari mayhem or the stench of scorched hair. What made Ember Drop terrifying wasn't just the force of it. It was the way everything blurred. Bkari warriors wielded human-engineered shock shields. A brute named Gore lugged a prototype shield that pulsed with electricity, designed by an Earthside tinkerer. Another Bkari sharpshooter, awkward as hell, but deadly, had borrowed a long-range rifle from Granger's own armory. Humans, meanwhile, carried Bkari burst mines and Robicon's weird little devices that mimicked a Bkari battle cry so perfectly it made enemy troops panic and run. The Drax expected brute force. They got chess mixed with a hurricane. By nightfall, the Drax outer ring was in ruins. Granger climbed the battered ramparts of a half-destroyed control tower, gazing down on burning streets where human engineers and Bkari war beasts worked side by side, clearing debris and searching for stragglers. Serak joined him, armor blackened, half his face smeared with something that wasn't blood, at least, not human blood. In his massive fist, he carried a battered helmet, the Drax commander's insignia still barely visible. "This one," Serak grunted, tossing the helmet at Granger's feet. "Said you would run. Said you were only men." Granger cracked a tired grin. "We are. Just not the kind he meant." There was a moment of silence, just distant thunder from salvage rigs rolling in. The kind of lull that made old soldiers ache in their bones. Serak broke it first. Not with bravado, but with a quiet warning. "You know this will not last. The galaxy does not like what we are becoming. Our enemies multiply. Our friend's thin. Granger shrugged. Lighting the stub of a cigar someone had tossed him as a joke. Doesn't have to last forever. Just has to last long enough. For what? To scare the hell out of them. Make the galaxy rethink what power looks like. And, for a while, that's exactly what happened. A month after Ember Drop, the Unified Trade Concord tried to host peace talks at Van Station, a massive wheel of glass and steel, perched on the rim of contested space and pretending to be neutral. Everyone knew neutrality was a business model, not a principle. But the galaxy still clung to old rituals. Granger wasn't officially invited, too low in rank, too polarizing. But Serak was. And he walked into the council chamber in battered armor, still scratched and scorched from Rulka 7, refusing to take off even a shoulder blade, which, in Bkari culture, was something like showing up with your shoes on the table and daring someone to complain. When the diplomatic staff tried to explain protocol, Serak responded by popping one of his own bones out of its socket and dropping it on the table. A silent enough of this. By the time Granger was allowed in as an observer, the room was already boiling. The Bkari Swarm, Triumph Collective, and Zenturi courts were united in outrage. They threw around terms like tactical aggression, biological recklessness, and cultural incompatibility as if saying it enough times would make the alliance dissolve. Ambassador Core of the Zenturi, his skull glowing faint blue under the lights, leveled the accusation everyone was thinking. Your alliance is an aberration. It violates every rule of sustainable interspecies cooperation. Granger leaned back, unbothered. You mean cooperation where one species gets rich and the other cleans plasma toilets? There were snickers, even from a Bkari warrior who'd wandered in by accident and decided to stay for the show. Serak stood, towering and calm, his translator lagging slightly behind his words. You do not object to war. You object to war fought well by those you cannot predict. Kenner of the Bkari bristled. This isn't about fear. It's about precedent. If this alliance spreads, there will be predators nesting in every coalition chamber. Serak grinned. Just a flash of teeth. We're already in your walls. You just never bothered to look down. That line made the room collectively tense. Some species' fur and spines actually rising. Granger, reading the temperature, stepped in. Let's not sugarcoat it. We're not trying to run the galaxy. We just got tired of watching it run us into the ground. Nobody cared when the Bkari were starving on dead jungle worlds, or when humans got squeezed out of the outer colonies. But the second we do something about it, suddenly, we're a threat to galactic peace. Kenner snapped. Because you are. Your methods are unhinged. Granger didn't bother to argue. Instead, he played a recording, a combat log from the Helix conflict. In it, a Bkari warrior, half dead from plasma burns, drags a wounded human captain behind enemy lines. The warrior's heart stops twice, the human uses his own oxygen supply and a stolen power cell to revive him. They both survive. No one had a comeback. For a few seconds, even the translators didn't hum. Loyalty looks different when it's earned, Granger said. Not manufactured. Outside Van's shining halls, trouble was already brewing. The Jiv, Shah, and Drax remnants were restless. Nobody liked what the alliance represented. Word of a joint offensive filtered back through encrypted channels and barroom rumors. Pirate broadcasts and mercenaries desperate for a payday. It was clear what was coming. Not a war on any one world, but a war on the very idea that two of the galaxy's most unpredictable species could work together. A war on the possibility. So the call went out. Every human unit that had trained with Bkari warp packs, every Bkari clan that owed a debt or a favor, was summoned. Some couldn't answer, wounded, scattered, lost in the void. But enough showed up to matter. Serak stood before them in a hangar cut into an asteroid, the air thick with the stink of hot metal and stronger coffee. He didn't make a speech. He just said, "They come for us, not expecting our teeth to be sharpened together. Let them learn." Granger took the floor next, eyes scanning soldiers. monsters, survivors. This isn't about territory or credits. It's about showing them the galaxy doesn't get to decide what we are. If they're uncomfortable, good. That means we're doing it right. 3 days later, they deployed. Hybrid ships, Bkari armor laced with Terran alloys. Human mechs loaded with guns but crewed by brutes who didn't need exosuits to lift them. The galaxy had watched them form, now it would watch them fight. The opening shots were fired at Trick's spine, a stretch of ancient orbital shipyards lashed to a dying gas giant. Enemy ships arrived expecting a brawl. A wild, bludgeoning defense. Instead, they got the Alliance's true specialty, unpredictable, brutal, and perfectly coordinated chaos. The joined fleet approached in silence, no threats, no bluster. Human stealth shuttles slipped through the wreckage, landing inside the enemy ships themselves. Bkari troops poured out in spirals, slashing and howling, dragging terrified crews into zero-G corridors where the only law was tooth and fire. Serak led the charge, ripping through a Char Command vessel before the enemy even clocked his thermal signature. Granger came minutes behind, flanked by sharpshooters and a grumpy AI drone named Dave. By the third hour, the battle was a mess, except it wasn't. Every strike had meaning. Every loss was balanced against a gain. Human-Bkari squads moved like a creature with 2 brains but a single heart. The JIV flagship tried its old swarm tactics. But this time, 50 Bkari Exeters leapt into vacuum, riding their own explosive charges straight into the hull. Serak's cousin, Karen, detonated the bridge with a grin later immortalized on 1,000 bootleg tattoos. But the cost was heavy. Granger's unit spent an hour pinned in a broken docking ring. 2 men bleeding out before help arrived. Serak's arm was shattered by a shock lance. He refused evacuation, too stubborn, too proud. At the end, Granger found himself on top of a crumbling comms tower. Helmet off, smoke stinging his eyes. Serak crouched beside him, cradling his broken limb, and muttered, "Tell me again why we didn't just eat the diplomats instead." Granger managed a dry chuckle. "We still might. Depends on tomorrow's briefing." Enemy fleets started to pull back, not because they'd lost outright, but because they couldn't comprehend what they were fighting. Their algorithms had no answer for loyalty built out of blood and bone, out of desperation and trust. There was no protocol for human war logic, twisted by Bkari rage and patience. The casualty numbers didn't matter. The message was clear: this alliance wasn't a fluke. It had been forged in chaos, tested in fire, and it held. 6 months passed. The galaxy watched and waited for the cracks to show, some hint that the alliance between humans and Bkari would splinter, collapse, devour itself from within. It never did. The scars remained. Yes, both on flesh and memory, but the partnership kept holding. Welded together by something nobody could have predicted, a kind of respect earned through shared struggle, shared losses, and a stubborn refusal to quit. There wasn't any victory parade. There rarely was. On the frontiers. What they got instead was a small monument on the edge of the battered Van diplomatic ring. No statues. No names. Just 2 helmets, 1 Terran tan, 1 Bkari black, resting together atop a weathered stone. The inscription was simple. 7 words. In every common tongue and a few no one had spoken in centuries. We watched each other's backs. That was enough. Granger visited. Once. He didn't linger. Fame never sat well with him. And there was always some new flare-up in the void, some pirate uprising out past the Lyric Nebula. Some desperate plea from a mining colony on a planet nobody remembered how to pronounce. Out on the rim, the problems never ended. He left a battered ration bar at the base of the monument and vanished before anyone could snap a picture or ask for a quote. Serak never visited. The dead don't need company, he said when asked. The living need the forge, not the flowers. Maybe he was right. Maybe that's why the legend outgrew the people at its center. The stories spread. As stories do, traded in low-lit asteroid bars. whispered in Bkari youth halls, played back on battered screens in cargo convoys hauling their way through the endless dark. Not tales of one war or one victory, but of a moment when two kinds of predator decided the old rules didn't fit anymore. When, for once, survival didn't mean eating the other. Of course, the galaxy didn't just move on. The council seats still simmered with resentment. The Jiv quietly rearmed, licking wounds and counting losses. The Drax syndicate dissolved into smaller, nastier fragments. Black market chatter said the Andal syndicate doubled their bounties on coalition architects, meaning Granger, Juno, Serak, and any fool who helped make Operation Ember drop a reality. But change, once loosed, is hard to leash again. The Bkari didn't suddenly become gentle. They remained what they were: wild, cunning, violent, impossible to intimidate. But their young began telling stories of humans who earned the right to be called brother, not by besting them in single combat, but by standing shoulder to shoulder in the mud. Human recruits, hard as nails, clever as devils, spoke with pride about serving in blood and dirt squads. And old rivalries slowly became rituals instead of grudges. There were slip-ups, sure, fights over territory, hot-headed new commanders who didn't remember why the alliance started. But those who had bled together, who had watched each other's backs in the marshes and space hulks, held the line. If anyone needed reminding, the footage was always there: a human and a Bkari, back to back, in the heart of some hellish firefight, trusting each other when no one else would. The galaxy's old order shuddered. Treaties bent. Frontiers shifted. For the first time in generations, raiders hesitated before attacking a Terran or Bkari ship, because you could never be sure who or what was waiting on the other side of that hull. Was it just another human trade captain? Or did he have a Bkari cousin with 4 arms and a grudge-riding shotgun? In time, even the most stubborn cynics came around, not because they wanted to, but because reality left them no choice. When the galaxy is burning, you pay attention to the firebreak, even if you don't like who built it. The legend of the Alliance became more than just propaganda or a catchy headline for the Holos streams. It became a kind of secret handshake, a whispered promise, passed from one battered outpost to the next: watch each other's backs. That's enough. The diplomats and politicians tried to bottle it up, regulate it, assign quotas and limits. It never worked for long. The frontiers have their own laws. And trust, once won in blood and dirt, doesn't fade easily. As for Granger, he kept moving. He was last spotted negotiating with a species that bled resin and smelled like burning rubber, out beyond the mapped stars. Someone said he wore a new patch on his sleeve, half Terran, half Bkari. No one knew if he was representing Earth, or the Legion, or just himself. Serak went back to his home world, but stories had him fighting off pirate clans in the asteroid belts, or showing up unannounced at human outposts just to test the meat. Old habits die hard. But wherever their paths went, the ripples of what they'd built together didn't die. They spread, as ripples do, out from a stone dropped in the center of an ancient pond, circling outward, touching worlds and lives and hearts that had never known such a thing was possible. And in the end, that was the secret. The real power of the Alliance wasn't in the weapons or the victories or the slogans carved into stone. It was in the decision, repeated, day after day, fight after fight, not to let the old fears decide who you could trust. Somewhere, on some forgotten world, a Bkari and a human sat side by side, cleaning weapons or laughing at some off-color joke, while outside, the galaxy raged and spun and threatened to come apart at the seams. But inside, in that small, stubborn circle of trust, the rules were different. Here, you watched each other's backs. And sometimes, that really was enough.